control exactly what people think, and that is our job.
Yeah.
Remember, it's illegal to possess these stolen documents. It's different for the media.
I was wondering who did that. Thanks.
Ain't nothing to it. A baby could do it.
You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy?
I'm a human being, god damn it! My life has value! It's time to ask yourself what you believe.
Mass murder, torture, perjury, embezzlement, fraud, deception, treason. These are just a few of your many crimes against humanity. You will not win this war, for you are fighting the very essence of humanity.
We make this judgment affirmatively. It will be an entire nation.
Hi, welcome to Truther Talk. You can check out our website at truthertalk.com. You can find Conspiracy Realist t-shirt there and official stories by Liam Sheff. Speaking of official stories, did you know that our next guest actually wrote a review of the official stories by Liam Sheff? Our next guest, Jim Marr.
Shut up, April. Say it ain't so.
I know.
Get out of town.
I know. I feel like we've made it now that we've got Jim Marr.
I know.
On the show.
There's no turning back, and there's no other place to go. You should just quit right now. That's just.
Yeah, we're done doing interviews, okay? Because now we got Jim Marr. I'm really excited because I'm a big fan. He's an old-fashioned real life reporter. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he's old school. He's old school, definitely.
They just don't make them like that anymore. Like they don't make the reporters that actually, hit the streets and they go and they talk to people and they interview them one-on-one and they get their information and do all that. I think we've had a few people that we would consider journalists on the show that do that, like Brendan Hunt.
And Chris Emery.
Who actually go out and research something and then they talk to people and they interview people and they get real stories. But
Chris Springmar is kind of like that too, even though I don't think he would consider himself a journalist, but he's actually gone out and talked to people, and he basically hasn't been sitting behind a computer.
Yeah.
People that get out of the house. These are the people that get out the house, get off the chair, get from behind the box of donuts and actually, report.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of that, Official Stories was written by our friend Liam Sheff, who, when he first started working as a journalist, he did an article called The House That AIDS Built about these orphans who were being used to test AIDS drugs. And, he went out and interviewed these people personally and individually. He interviewed the people who, parents of some of the people who were, and the nuns who were running the orphanage and the people who were experimenting on these kids and stuff like that. Like, he went in there and actually talked to these people and talked to some of them on the phone and talked to them some personally. And it's really rare these days in journalism. And Jim Marr, who knows? Like, he's probably interviewed so many people about the JFK assassination. I mean, I can't wait to talk to him about it and get into because I'm such a big fan. I mean, if you've seen the movie JFK, which is based on Jim Marr's book, it's just, we wouldn't, I don't know that the truth movement would be what it is without somebody like Jim Marr,
Yeah.
Would it even be there? I mean, would people who are out there really researching and trying to get to the bottom of things like the JFK assassination, would so many people have looked into 9/11 or looked into, if it weren't for somebody like him who got people questioning the government and questioning their intentions and questioning the things that they were doing. I mean, would we know any of this stuff? I don't know. It's kind of curious to. I mean, maybe eventually we would have figured it out, but he certainly
maybe we'd be behind, and maybe the globalists will be further ahead with their agenda because according to Bilderberg, people that leak out information, they're like about 12 years behind what their original agenda is, and who knows if it's because of people like Jim Marr. Not saying it's just Jim Marr's, because I don't want to put all that pressure on him, but at the same time, he's instrumental in basically, digging up the truth and inspiring other people to do the same.
Yeah, it's crazy. That's why, I'm so excited to talk to him, because it's people like him that I feel have inspired this movement and have been a huge part in it, the reason why it is, what it is now. And he's gone into, he started off with JFK, and then he did another book called The $1 Trillion Conspiracy, and I think in that book he does talk about Bilderberg, bringing them up. He'll mention, some of these elites and things like that. So he knows what's going on, like he knows what's up. And he's a real life journalist, meaning that he goes and he talks to people and he actually interviews people and he does real research. He's not just sitting on the internet and doing what he's doing. But
which is actually really insulting. Like it is, because I was the article that I wrote about the vaccines, it really pissed me off about the reason I wrote it was I read an article from a guy that I guess considers himself a writer or a journalist, but his research. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't say what the article was about. It was accusing people who didn't vaccinate of spreading basically disease and death because they were responsible for outbreaks like measles and mumps and the flu and stuff like that, which wasn't even true. And I remember him using Andrew Wakefield and Jenny McCarthy. He took what they said way out of context. He didn't even bother. You can tell he didn't even bother to look at an interview from them. He probably got a reference of somebody telling him what they thought the interview was about, because had he actually listened to interviews of them, he would have seen that they did not say what he wrote. And he also, just some of his references were just way off, and I was just shocked that he couldn't even call that an article. He can even call himself a reporter. I thought it was a huge disservice to Dr. Wakefield and Jenny McCarthy. When you report, you're supposed to really get the person's side of the story.
Right.
And you're supposed to get both sides and then let people kind of make up their mind.
Right.
But, and it's hard, as a reporter, as a person, to not have your own bias or not have your own opinion. But I just couldn't believe that those are people's lives that he's writing about, that he should have more respect for that. And I think a lot of people now, when I read a lot of these articles online, it's basically just opinion pieces. And people don't really seem to do balanced reporting. And I read another article, it was online Scientific, I think it was Scientific American, called How to Argue with Vaccine Crazies. And a huge controversial thread, and of course, and it was inspiring to see, though, that a lot of people were really upset that were subscribers to Scientific American who didn't necessarily support anti-vaccination, but still thought that they had a right to have their stories told without or to get their perspective of why people didn't vaccinate, as opposed to be just labeled crazy.
Right, exactly. And you'll see a lot of times when they want to go, if they do end up interviewing people from both sides of it, they'll find people that they deliberately kind of don't seem credible. Like, for example, I'm thinking of, there used to be this show on TV with the Penn and Teller guys, you know who they are?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so they did a show debunking, that vaccines caused autism, and they interviewed some parents of an autistic child who was vaccine damaged, and these parents came off as sounding like, they had only figured out that their child was vaccine damaged by looking on the internet, and that the internet was how, that they figured all this out. And I'm sure that there's more to it, and they just did clever editing to make it seem that way, but they made these parents look like they were really stupid and really ignorant, and that they didn't even have their own thought at all, that it basically just came to them from, internet crazies. And so what you'll see a lot in what they call journalism these days is people, even if they do bother to look at the other side, they want to find people who, or they'll edit it cleverly. Maybe the people are really intelligent, but they make them look dumb by, editing and making it seem like they don't know what they're talking about, or just isolating what they say and taking it out of context. So it's really disturbing, and it's really sad, and the mainstream.
And it really shows the lack of confidence in the other side if they have to cheat, basically. They're cheating. Because if their theories were that strong and stood on their own, they would be able to be like, okay, well, fine. Like, look at all of the other side. See what the other side has to say. I'm completely confident in my side. I don't feel the need to edit or manipulate the situation, because honestly, I don't go around debunking pro-vaccine people. I'm just like, look at the evidence from both sides. Look at my side, fine. Look at the other side too, but I'm confident if you really look at both sides, then you would understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
I don't feel, so.
No, and it's really interesting because I guess what you're talking about, this guy's article where you wanted to write a rebuttal to it was because it was so poorly researched and people are going off thinking that, that's true, even though it's just this guy's opinion.
It was vindictive and it was poorly researched.
There's nothing to it whatsoever. It was like, it was ridiculous. And it's really sad because it's completely on him to come up with the information and the citations and the research to support what he has to say. That kind of stuff, if I were an editor, I wouldn't even allow that kind of stuff through.
Oh, he's his own editor. I was going to write a letter to him, and I found out. I was going to write a letter actually to the editor when I wrote the article, and I found that he's associate editor. So basically, there you go. Which is even worse. It's even more horrifying.
Well, and the thing is that the mainstream media now is a dinosaur, pretty much. It's like you can't really get anything from anything that's mainstream anymore. You can't go to your regular TV shows or your networks and expect to hear real news.
I have a question about that, though. Do you think that's just your, and I'm not being like mean or condescending or smartass by asking you this, but do you think because you're an alternative media, that's your point of view? Because
I don't.
Because I look at my mom and she still watches like the regular news and gets her information from there. So, why do you think that? I'm just curious.
Well, the reason I think that is because when I have researched the background of, let's say, take a network like CNN, and when you look at how a network like that started, it was the first all 24-hour news channel. And how did they get people to invest in 24-hour news? Well, how they did it was they started reporting on the Gulf War. That was the thing that was going on at the time. And it was owned by Ted Turner, by the way. I'm just using them as an example.
Big surprise. Okay, go on.
I'm just using them as an example, but you can translate it as that. So, how did he get people interested in, this war? How did he get people to invest in it? Well, first of all, they actually set up fake scenes. They started setting up fake studios and things like that, and reporters, so it would imply to the public, if you were watching it, that they were actually on the scene in the Gulf, but many of them were not, okay? They weren't even there. They were just, but they would put that as a backdrop so that it would look like it, and they weren't necessarily lying to you. They weren't saying that they were there. Oh, we're here reporting from the Gulf, but it was implied. You would look at it and you would think, so that's deceptive.
Right. With like green screen?
With green screen or with a set.
Oh, hell no. Okay, go on.
Yeah, you can find this on YouTube. It's everybody knows that this happened. Not everybody knows, but, it's easy to locate if you're looking for it. So anyway, so that's one. So if you use CNN as an example. Now, CNN was also the first network to hire somebody to head their news department who was from advertisement. So in other words, instead of hiring somebody who had a background in news, what they hired was somebody who had a background in advertisement. So they could sell you deodorants, they could sell you, shampoo or whatever it was they were marketing. So the idea was not to tell you the news, but to sell you the news. Okay? So you were supposed to buy whatever it is that they're selling to you. Not only that, but there's been plenty of whistleblowers like Amber Lyons who come out and say, you start off as a reporter, and then as time goes on, you realize that you're being instructed by the government. She said it was really bad under Bush, got worse under Obama. and that they just basically tell you what you can and cannot report on. So how is that?
Reporting. It's not.
How can I believe anything that comes out of the mainstream news? When one, I know it was, they use the Edward Bernays model to sell you, to advertise. They actually hire people. They don't even try to hide the fact that they actually hire people out of advertisement. So why would you hire someone who worked in advertisement to be in a newsroom? Because you want to sell them your story. You want them to believe in it just like they would believe in a product. They want to buy, a truck or buy it's the same kind of thing. So, and this has been going on since the 1950s. And then if you go back even further, you take like in the 1950s, they started, when, TV and advertisement were starting to become big and it was in its heyday, they started to take, people who worked in psychology. Okay? And, this is documented. You can look it up. You can even wiki it. It's pretty mainstream information that's out there. And, believe it or not. And so this is, so they actually would take, people who worked in psychology so that they could manipulate, it was early sets of like trying to use, manipulation and psychology to influence the public into getting people to think that they needed things that they didn't need. So that they needed products that they didn't need. Now, you take the fact that they're selling you stuff, and you know that, commercialism is like that, capitalism, commercials are like that. But then you translate that into the news. So this is supposed to be an unbiased thing.
Yeah.
And these are the same people that are psychologically trying to profile you so that they can tell you what you want to hear in order for you to watch their crap. So it's not my opinion. This is a fact. This is how it went down. And and you can tell when you watch it that it's biased and that's not really real. But so I think the mainstream news is a dinosaur. That part is my opinion. But how it works, and how the system is, that's not my opinion. That's just a fact. They're not really trying to inform you. They're trying to sell you a product. What is this product? Is it, from the White House? Is it from the military-industrial complex? They want you to believe in their wars. They want you to believe in their in whatever it is that they're investing in. I don't know. Their Obamacare, they want you to buy that crap. Whatever it is, but they're going to use the news to sell it. And where is the incentive for people who are working for, like, let's say, one of their big financiers is the pharmaceutical industry. So a lot of these people, a lot of these networks, that's their biggest client. Yeah. It's their biggest frontier. It's like because it's not just the crazy pharmaceuticals that we talk about that have a million side effects, but it's NyQuil, it's Tylenol, and all these things. Those people are that's all that stuff is made by pharmaceutical companies, and they're huge business. So where's their incentive to tell you a fair and balanced story about pharmaceuticals? Where's their incentive? It's not. Their incentive would be to actually not balance it out because that's who their client is. That's where their bread is buttered, right? So, I don't know. As far as, I don't know. Is it, so, well, your question was, is it my opinion or do I really think it's true?
Think it's true? Well, because like how many people, do you still see people really buying into the news? I know people still watch the news.
Right.
Like how many people are really buying it or really take it seriously? I don't know.
I don't know.
And we know that as people in alternative news, we know how that system works, but I'm just saying people that aren't. So when you say, I guess maybe what I should be asking, when you say the mainstream news is a dinosaur, does that mean that it's fading out for everybody, for the mainstream public, for what? Like, what do you mean exactly?
Oh, I mean it's I guess I mean that it's fading out because I think more people are getting their news from the internet now. And sure, there are still some people who watch the news, but I think there's a large number of people, even who are not in the truth movement, who are not into alternative media, that are starting to question the validity of mainstream news, and because they're getting so many access to so many other sources because we have the internet now. So I find that, personally, I don't, I look at the internet more, and, I'll even look at mainstream sources, but on the internet.
Yeah, for comedy.
But, for comedy, and sometimes, you might get something out of it. Just really depends. But,
I'm sorry, go on.
But my point is that I do think it's fading out. Yes, I do. I do think it's starting to become less and less relevant. And, well, it's bringing up CNN again. I think someone came on and said that they don't even have they got rid of their investigative journalist department.
Yeah.
They just got rid of it.
I think it was Amber Lyon.
Yeah, she said that they don't do it anymore because they don't need to, because they don't really have true investigations anymore. So that's where I was going with the whole beginning of this conversation, is that Jim Marrs is a real investigative journalist, like for real.
He walks outside the house. For real. He's
smart, and he's fun. I like his energy and his personality.
Very lighthearted too. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Anytime I've seen him in anything, he always seems to keep a good head on his shoulders, and a light kind of sense of humor, light personality, rather than being dark and grisly about all these things that he's seen and witnessed. Because he's probably heard some really horrific stories from various people that he's interviewed over the years, but he manages to stay light, and I like him. And he's was inspirational to us because we thought he's just kind of just the way that he works and all of that, and the fact that he kept so light about himself, I think, was part of inspired me a lot to try and maintain that level of lightness inside of all this darkness.
I'm going to ask him that too, because I'm curious to know how do you not become that dude in the basement with the tinfoil hat that because sometimes some of the stuff we come across, it weighs on you.
Sure.
Like some of the thing that really gets to me, that's really disturbing to me is like the child trafficking. MK Ultra victims, like those are, like that makes me so, it upsets me so much, and, that's really, that stuff is just really looking at the evil side of humanity. We have great potential for good, but we also have a tremendous potential for evil as well.
Exactly.
And I know people that, they come across some of the stuff that we personally know people too, it really gets to them, and you gotta kinda try and steer them in the direction, of the light, because you can go down that dark rabbit hole and just kinda stay stuck in there. Or keep going down. Keep worrying about everything. You can really worry about everything. What do we have? We have Fukushima. We have other various, nuclear power plants that are melting. There are, what else do we have? The fucking robotic mosquitoes. I was like, well, damn, like sometimes thinking about all the bad stuff too just kind of keeps me, I laugh about it because I'm just like, well, there's no way that everything's going to happen at the same time. Like HARP. You know what I mean? Like, we have HARP, we have they have viruses supposedly that can just unleash on the public. We have the mosquitoes, we have power plants, we have nuclear warhead bombs, we have aliens. I mean, all of these ideas and all of these scenarios that have been projected out into the universe, the possibility is endless for just bad shit to happen. Are they all going to happen at the same time? I doubt it. And if not, then fuck it. I mean, what can you do? So you could honestly be worrying. I know people that worry about like everything, like all the time. It's too much. You have to be like, damn, man, you just have to sit back and laugh and say, this is some crazy shit.
It's true, yeah. And so Jim Marrs is our guest. We're going to take a short break, and then when we get back, we're going to be talking to him. So I'm really excited. Stay tuned, because we are going to take a break, and when we get back, the one and only Jim Marrs. Please stay tuned.
All right.
Hello, thanks for having me on your radio. Even though we're not from a famous rock and roll band, if we were, even though we sound a little like we are, we'd definitely wear a Conspiracy Realist t-shirt, because they're gear, aren't they? Oh yeah, they're really gear. I want to write a song about them. Conspiracy Realist t-shirts at truthertees.com. I gotta think of the middle 8. Shop.truthertees.com. What does that mean? It's the internet. What's that? I don't know. It's a net. It's between things. Shop.truthertees.com. What's that? It's where you get Conspiracy Realist t-shirts. Oh, gear.
A native of Fort Worth, Texas, Mr. Mars earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in journalism from the University of North Texas in 1966 and attended graduate school at Texas Tech in Lubbock for 2 years more. He has worked for several Texan newspapers, including the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, where beginning in 1968 he served as a police reporter and general assignments reporter covering stories locally in Europe and the Middle East. After a leave of absence to serve with the 4th Army Intelligence Unit during the Vietnam War, he became a military and aerospace writer for the newspaper and an investigative reporter. Since 1980, Mr. Mars has been a freelance writer, author, and public relations consultant. He also published a rural weekly newspaper along with a monthly tourism tabloid, a cable television show, and several videos. In 2007, Mr. Mars retired from the University of Texas at Arlington, where he taught a course on the Kennedy assassination since 1976. In 1989, his book Crossfire, The Plot That Killed Kennedy, was published to critical acclaim and reached the New York Times paperback nonfiction bestseller list in mid-February 1992. It became a basis for Oliver Stone film JFK. Mr. Mars served as the chief consultant for both the film screenplay and production. Mr. Mars is the author of several other books. You can find out more about him at jimmars.com. Please welcome to the show, Jim Mars. Hi, Jim. How are you?
Howdy. It's great to be with you.
It's good to be with you, too.
Yes, it's good to have you. What an honor.
Yeah. So just start from the beginning. When did you learn that the world wasn't so black and white? Or were you born knowing the world wasn't so black and white?
Well, I'll have to blame reading, okay? By the time I was in getting out of elementary school, I was an avid reader, and I read all of the classic books, for young people, including Tale of Two Cities and Charles Dickens and on and on. Then, of course, all the popular stuff like Black Beauty, and I read all the Hardy Boys. I really enjoyed them. And then I even read all the Nancy Drews. I enjoyed them. So I've just read everything, and so I've always had a curious mind. And went back in Baptist Sunday school, when they'd say, well, this says this and this is the way this is, and I'd go, well, why is it that way, And besides that, here in the Bible it says this here, but then back there, several pages back, it said something else. Wait a minute, what's it revealing? And I was told, well, you're not supposed to worry about all that stuff. You're just supposed to have faith, Well, and of course, what I would respond with was, well, then why would God make me with an inquisitive mind and then expect me not to use it,
Yeah.
So I have just always been very curious, and all I want to know is what's going on. What's the truth, okay? If the country's being run by the mafia, okay, so be it. I'm not a revolutionary, but I think people deserve to know that, and we should be operating from the standpoint of truth, not living in la-la land and looking at everything through rose-colored glasses. Does that make any sense to you?
That makes a lot of sense, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And that leads to my next question, which is, how did you become a journalist? And what kind of sparked your interest into starting that up?
Well, yes, I've always been interested in communication. In fact, again, going back even into junior high school, we had a little mimeograph sheet paper, school paper, and I drew cartoons for it, and I wrote articles for it. And then when I got into high school, I worked on the school paper, and I drew cartoons and wrote stories, and even acted as an editor, a page editor, and then also photographer, just a little bit of everything. And then, but to tell you the truth, when I got to the university, I wasn't real sure what my degree path would be and what I was going to major in. So I asked him, I said, look, what degree plan do you offer that does not require any math? Because I was terrible in math. And algebra's the worst. Here I am 70 years old, and you know what? I haven't really had to use any algebra yet, as far as I know. So anyway, they said, well, there's journalism, and I said, okay, sign me up. So that's how I became a journalist. But then I applied my inquisitive nature to that, and it's been a real roller coaster Bride, because even though I've been a poor reporter, and if your desire is to be very successful and make lots of money, don't go into journalism, okay? That ain't going to happen. But for being a poor journalist, I sure have had a lot of exciting times because I got to travel as a reporter to the Middle East, to Europe. I've traveled to China, to Tibet, Central America, Canada, flew over Alaska, went with the Texas Air Guard and flew over Labrador and down into Europe. And I've traveled all around, been to Israel, been to lots of places, and ridden in hot air balloons and rode elephants and just all kinds of wild stuff. And so being a reporter is really pretty mind-opening, and it'll certainly broaden your horizons. And I think that's maybe what I have to offer people is, we have become a very specialized society. Everybody has their own little speciality. Doctors know doctoring, but they don't know a whole lot else, and they certainly don't know about nutrition because they're not taught about it. Lawyers know the law, but too many of them don't understand justice or truth, and I could go on, but you get the idea. And I consider myself the last of the dying breed. I'm a generalist, okay? I know a little bit about all sorts of topics, and I don't claim to be much of an expert in anything except possibly the Kennedy assassination, because I have studied that for so long and in such depth, and because it happened right here in my backyard, so to speak, and the fact that I've been on to it since the get-go. In fact, I have a photograph of me dancing on the stage of Jack Ruby's Carousel Club that was taken about a month before the Kennedy assassination. So I've been there and been with it the whole time.
We're younger. We're a bit younger than you, so I'm just curious. For a person who was alive when Kennedy was around, what was he like? Because you mentioned you studied his assassination, so obviously he meant something to you. What was he like as a president? What was your perspective or your experience of Kennedy as a president?
Well, I have just probably a different type viewpoint. There were a lot of people that just loved and adored him, and I was not necessarily one of them. I was a Texas redneck, okay, and I was when he was running for president, he was railed against by the preachers down here, and they said, "Oh, if he gets elected, the Pope's going to run the country." I mean, because it's hard to believe today when we're talking about same-sex marriage and abortion and stuff that you couldn't even talk about back then. But there was a big thing about him being a Catholic and being the first Catholic that was elected president. So there was that. And then there was the fact that he, not very vigorously, but he obviously was supportive of the civil rights movement. And that earned him a lot of animosity, particularly in the South, but actually everywhere. In my experience, there's actually more overt discrimination in the North than there ever was in the South. But anyway, I was not particularly in favor of his politics, but I did think that it was cool to have a young good-looking guy with a good-looking wife as President of the United States, and I particularly enjoyed the idea that little John and Caroline, when they were little kids, there they are, and you'd see them on the newsreels just crawling around on the rug there in the Oval Office of the White House, and I thought that was kind of neat. And in fact, if you think about it, we haven't had anything like that since. In fact, that was one of the things that happened when Kennedy was killed, was that generational politics was interrupted. And what I'm talking about there is that, every 20 years, every decade, every generation, you should get someone with a more modern outlook. Kennedy, for example, was the first president of the United States who had actually been born in the 20th century. But then after him, then all of a sudden we get Nixon, and then we get Ronald Reagan, one of the oldest presidents. And, this generational thing, we haven't had a really young guy in the presidency, I guess, until Obama, and the least said about that, the better.
Yeah. It's okay. We're pretty open. We try to.
Well, but there's a huge critical difference between Obama and Kennedy. Both of them were reasonably young men, but Kennedy actually was very well educated and very well steeped in knowledge and history. And in fact, he first came to public attention when he wrote a book called Why England Slept. And this was all about how England was not paying sufficient attention to the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis in Germany, and how did it cost them as the war approached, and they were attacked by Germany and almost conquered. And so he had a world view, and he really understood kind of how things are working, as opposed to Obama, who, unfortunately, as we now know, can't really even utter a complete sentence unless he's reading it off a teleprompter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very true. Yeah, and your book, Crossfire, is what you're probably most well known for, and it's what the movie JFK was based on. And so going back to how you started investigating the assassination of JFK, what sparked your interest? Why did you want to start looking into that?
Well, my interest was sparked from the get-go. I was a sophomore in college, and I already on a degree for journalism, and here this happened right here in Dallas, where I would go into there almost every weekend, to party around. And so it just kind of seemed incumbent upon me to keep up with what was going on. But I'll tell you, there's a couple of things that occurred to me that very weekend. First off, we were told that right off the bat, within a couple of hours, that they had captured a guy, Lee Harvey Oswald. And then a little later, they said they found this rifle up on the 6th floor, a bolt-action 6.5 millimeter Italian Mannlicher Carcano. Is an Italian war rifle, and it was notoriously inaccurate. So inaccurate that the Italians had nicknamed it the humane weapon because you couldn't kill anybody with it. It was such a piece of junk weapon. So anyway, but even at that time, being a Texas boy, I'd been deer hunting. In fact, I had some bolt-action rifles of my own. And I knew that with a bolt-action rifle, you have to work the bolt, inject a cartridge into the chamber, pull the bolt down, and then aim, and then fire, and then raise the bolt again, pull it back, eject the empty round, and then slide a new round into the chamber, and then you're ready to fire again. And that whole procedure, and this was later verified by the FBI, takes approximately 2 seconds, okay? So they were telling us that based on the Zapruder film, they knew the shooting sequence happened in 5.6 seconds, a little less than 6 seconds. Well, and then they're trying to tell us that Oswald fired 3 shots, and 2 of the shots hit the president, and 1 of the shots missed. Okay, but now wait a minute. That's almost quicker than you can just pull the trigger and operate the bolt. And then I got to listening to the interviews with people in Dealey Plaza, and since then I've interviewed perhaps as much as 100 of them, and they all say the same thing. They said there was 1 shot, and then a pause, and then 2 shots just right on top of each other, kind of a bam, bam, bam. All right, well, again, you're not going to get a bam, bam with a bolt-action rifle. The best you get is a bam, bam, bam. That's the bolt-action rifle. So right away, I knew that something wasn't right. And then you had all these people who were talking about a second gunman firing from the infamous grassy knoll. Well, that made a whole lot more sense to me than the bolt-action rifle that can get 2 shots off within the 2 seconds. So, but I didn't have anything to put in the place of the official version, and that's another thing that you guys need to understand. Back at that time, everyone had unlimited faith and confidence in the federal government of the United States. If J. Edgar Hoover, as head of the FBI, had come on television and said, hey, 2 + 2 is 5, everybody would have said, well, that's funny, I always thought it was 4, but boy, if J. Edgar says it's 5, it must be 5. That's the kind of absolute faith and confidence that the public had in the federal government. And of course, that's not there anymore. In fact, actually, that is pretty well gets to the heart of the Kennedy assassination. It comes down to simply a question of belief system, or as I say, BS. If you have unlimited faith and confidence in the federal government, then you're going to have unlimited faith and confidence in the evidence that they present to you in this case. And I'll be the first to admit that taken at that level, the evidence against Oswald seems pretty damning, okay? But if you have the slightest question about trusting the government, and let's go back to the 60s when they were telling us there's light at the end of the tunnel in Vietnam. This is prior to the subsequent attack of the Viet Cong, prior to the Tet offensive. And then they tell us, Nixon tells us, I'm not a crook, but then he has to resign before he's prosecuted. And then we have George Herbert Walker Bush says, hey, read my lips, no new taxes. And then one of the first things he does is increase taxes. We've got weapons of mass destruction. We were told about in Iraq, which turned out to be false. And now we have a president who tells us if you want to keep your health insurance, you can keep your health insurance, except turns out you can't. So, do we really want to trust them? And if you don't trust the federal government, then the evidence begins to fall apart, and you find yourself in a whole new ballgame. And I'll give you a really good example of this. On Monday night, following the Friday assassination, the district attorney of Dallas, Henry Wade, held a news conference, and almost as an afterthought, he says, oh, have I mentioned we've got his fingerprints on the rifle? Well, that pretty well seemed to cinch it in everybody's mind. Oswald had him arrested. He's suspect. His fingerprints on the rifle. Shoot, he did it, But wait a minute. Let's peel this back and really start looking at it. And we find out that on Friday night of the assassination, against the wishes of the Dallas authorities, because someone in powerful position in Washington and demanded that they turn over all the evidence to the FBI, even though the FBI had no jurisdiction in the case because there were no federal laws about assassinating the president. But the Dallas police chief said in an effort to be cooperative, they went ahead and turned over all of the evidence to the FBI, which they kept for 3 days before officially entering the case, which should explain why there's so much controversy over the evidence. But anyway, the very next day then, the rifle had been shipped to Washington, and the very next day on Saturday, November the 23rd, there's a document signed by J. Edgar Hoover himself, and it said no latent fingerprints were found on the rifle or clip or even the inner parts of the rifle. So on Saturday, there's no fingerprints on the rifle. On Sunday, there are government documents showing that the rifle was sent back to Dallas. And on Monday morning, 2 FBI agents, Harrison and Vincent Drain, carried the rifle over to Miller Funeral Home in Fort Worth, where they were preparing Oswald's body for burial. Paul Grudy was the funeral home director there, and he became a good friend of mine when I began working as a active full-time professional reporter in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And he told me back then, and he has since said publicly, that he was there when the FBI agents put Oswald's dead hand on the rifle. And he said he had a heck of a time getting the black fingerprint ink off of Oswald's dead hand in time for the burial that afternoon. So, see, do you believe the fingerprints were legitimate evidence? I don't.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So then, when did you start to, because obviously there were so many holes in the official story that you were starting to uncover, things that were just outright crazy. And then, but when did you find that?
When I had my epiphany, that was probably would have been in the fall of 1972. I had never been satisfied with the official version. I knew something was funny going on. But again, we all had faith and confidence in the government. But in the fall of 1972, when it finally turns out that the Watergate burglars, okay, who had been caught and been hauled up before the judge, and there were rumors that they were connected to President Richard Nixon, and everybody kept denying that. But then finally, Eugene McCord, one of the Watergate burglars, finally opened up to the judge and said, yes, actually, we're working for the committee to reelect the president, which was Nixon's reelection campaign. All right, so all of a sudden, that showed that the President of the United States could and did and had lied to us, okay? Well, now that opens the whole thing up, because once you realize that people in positions of high authority in our government, which we used to trust and venerate, actually can and will lie to us, then all bets are off, and we needed to start studying the assassination from all angles, and that's when the controversy really picked up speed. And in fact, by the mid-70s, there were calls for a reinvestigation, and that resulted in the House Select Committee on Assassinations, which, by the way, became the latest of the government pronouncements. And most people this gets lost on because they didn't get that kind of coverage like the Warren Commission did. But the latest federal government conclusion for the Kennedy assassination is there was at least one shooter on the grassy knoll, and therefore it was probably a conspiracy. And but we don't know who that was, and we're out of time and money. So also it was Lee Harvey Oswald with 3 shots from the depository. And of course even that is now being called into severe question. And what's interesting, guys, is that I'm no longer alone in all this, and it's not me and a handful of other researchers and conspiracy theorists. Now the polls show that as high as perhaps 85 or 90% of the public today believes that Kennedy was killed as the result of a conspiracy. And the problem is we don't know precisely who was involved in this conspiracy. And there's a reason for that. You see, there's been a huge cover-up in the Kennedy assassination, but not in the way that we normally think of a cover-up. We think of a cover-up in that there's a lack of evidence, and everything's been hidden away. We can't find any facts and evidence. But in this case, it's the exact opposite. This is cover-up through obfuscation. You got so many people claiming so many things, so many theories, so many claims and counterclaims, charge and countercharge, that the average person just starts shaking their head and says, oh, wow, I don't think I want to hear anymore. And so we go into these periods when people just kind of turn away. And that's another thing I might point out, is that for about 15 years after the Kennedy assassination, it was just considered impolite to bring up the subject in decent company. And guys, we're going through the same thing right now with the attacks of 9/11. It's just considered not very proper to even talk about it. And yet I'm here to tell you that there's so much obvious deceit and inconsistencies and problems with the official story of 9/11 that it makes the Kennedy assassination look like truly a deep, dark mystery.
And you say that 85% of the population don't believe the official narrative of the JFK assassination. I think you deserve a lot of credit for that, Jim, because if it weren't for your book, I don't know how many people would be questioning it at this point, because a lot of people base that on the Oliver Stone film that they saw. They're like, which was based on, in large part, on your book. Sure. And so, going back to when you were starting to have this epiphany, when did you suspect maybe this was in line with intelligence, or when did you think that maybe there was some involvement with the CIA? Like, how deep did you start to realize that this might go?
Right. Well, this really opened up a whole new can of worms. You got to understand, at the time of the Kennedy assassination, because I was a journalism major, and at least like to think of myself as being pretty much up on various issues and topics, I was definitely aware of the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. But even then, I did not know very much about it. And you have to understand that I was in the minority. Most people in 1963 had never even heard of the CIA. They had no idea what it was. They had no idea what it did. Just like today, most people don't know anything much about the NSA, the National Security Agency. Although over the past year, thanks to the revelations of Edward Snowden, we're now learning more and more and more. But it was that way back in the 60s. Nobody really heard of the CIA because it was a secret government organization. However, once it came out that government officials would and could lie to you, and then as we rolled into the 70s, we had the Garrison investigation in New Orleans, and all of a sudden the CIA it was popping up all in that. And then we had the Church Committee in the mid-70s, and then it comes out that the CIA was involved in overthrowing governments all around the world, and to include assassination. So now we know that we have a secret government agency that is experienced in overthrowing governments and killing national leaders. So all of a sudden the idea that Kennedy may have been killed by people within his own country and his own government did not seem quite so preposterous.
Right. So, most people have seen the Oliver Stone film, as April mentioned. Do you think that they did a good job portraying your book, or do you think that there's any information that you that was left out?
Well, let me say this. Number one, I was paid for the rights to use my book, the information in there, and I was just very fortunate. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time, because I later realized that Oliver Stone had already decided he was going to make a movie, and he was going to make a movie on the Kennedy assassination. And as he later told me, this is not a documentary, I'm making a movie. So he needed a story. And his story was about the prosecution of Clay Shaw by District Attorney Jim Garrison in New Orleans. So he used Jim Garrison's book, which told about his experiences in that prosecution. What he didn't have was an overview of all of the aspects of the actual assassination in Davie Plaza. And, of course, that's what he got from my book, Crossfire, The Plot to Kill Kennedy. Now, I got paid for the rights, and I had my money, and so I was fully prepared to repudiate that film if I thought that Stone had deviated too far from the facts and the information and conclusions that I had. But this is really cool. He did not just take my book and run with it. He had his own investigative staff headed by a very sharp lady named Jane Rusconi, and his staff backtracked on my book. They even interviewed some of the people I'd interviewed. They saw the same documents I saw, and interestingly enough, I support the film because they came to the same conclusions, saw the same things that I had. And, of course, there are always gaps and holes, but I want to tell you something, that the film JFK, Oliver Stone, while not necessarily ground truth, because we don't know and we can't prove a lot of the aspects, but in general, that is the closest that the American public has gotten to the truth of the Kennedy assassination up until this time.
Do you think it's ever going to be possible to truly know who assassinated JFK?
Is it going to be possible what?
To know who truly assassinated.
Oh, who did it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is what I'm asked all the time. Will we ever know the truth about the Kennedy assassination? And my response is yes, we know it now. But, you're not asking the right question. What you're actually asking is, will there come a time when there'll be a press conference and some national political figure will get up and go, okay, here's what really happened to Kennedy? No, that is not going to happen. All right? So, because, think about this. If they ever formally admit that Kennedy was killed as a result of an internal conspiracy, that there was a coup d'etat in the United States in 1963, that makes every government since his, starting with Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George Bush, right on up, it makes them all illegitimate. And can you imagine what would happen when the lawyers get hold of that? And every law, every regulation, every presidential executive order, everything, they'd throw them all out saying, well, they were not a legitimate government, so none of this counts. It would throw everything into total chaos, so they will never, ever come out and fess up the truth to the whole thing. But do we know the truth? Certainly. All you have to do, again, is look at the evidence. Now, don't get lost in the details. Don't start examining the trees so close that you miss the forest. The forest is simply this. In the Kennedy assassination, we have crimes committed. We have suppression of evidence, destruction of evidence, fabrication of evidence, suppression of evidence, intimidation of witnesses. These are all crimes, especially committed with a capital murder case. If you and I committed any of those crimes, we could be sent to prison from now on. Okay? Well, the people who committed those crimes can be traced right back to and proven to have come from Lyndon Johnson and his next-door neighbor and old buddy, J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI. And they alone determined what happened. The FBI was in sole authority of investigating the assassination, and the Warren Commission was handpicked by Lyndon Johnson and paid for out of discretionary funds for the President of the United States. So the man who most benefited from the assassination was total charge of the investigation into it. How convenient, okay? And so that's why we can now know that these two men, Lyndon Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover, they are guilty in the Kennedy assassination and could be found so in a court of law. Because can we prove that they ordered or orchestrated the assassination? No. But what we can prove is that both of those men took actions afterwards to confuse, confound, and block any truthful investigation into what actually happened. This, under our legal system, makes them accessories after the fact, okay? And under our legal system, accessories after the fact are considered just as guilty as the person who pulled the trigger. In fact, here in Texas, we've executed people for murder that the facts of the case showed they didn't pull the trigger, they didn't kill anybody, but they were an accessory after the fact, and they're considered just as guilty as the murderer. Okay, so Lyndon Johnson, J. Edgar Hoover, they're guilty, and that's what transforms what at that time was merely another Texas homicide into a national coup d'etat, and that's the truth.
Wow. You know, when I was watching JFK, I became really sensitive to the plight of the character, or Jim Garrison, you know, being torn between his family and his quest for truth and corruption. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, have you experienced the same plight as an investigator?
Well, yes, to a certain degree. It's an uphill fight, and lots of times you not only have to fight with your the sources, and you have to fight with the editors. And then what's kind of surprised me, I was kind of prepared for that, but what really surprised me is the number of people I know, friends of mine, people in the public, who go, "Oh, I don't want to know that. Don't tell me about that." You know, so you got to fight against public apathy too. And yes, I've had people tell me about maybe you should not be doing this, and even threatening me. But hey, you know, it's kind of like I once told my mom, who was telling me maybe you ought to not be writing about the Kennedy assassination because you're kind of going head to toe here against you know, the superpower of the Western world. And I told her, I said, well, yeah, but where would we be if Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and Hamilton and all those guys, what would have happened if their moms had said, "Hey, you're messing with the British Empire"?
Maybe their moms did, but they didn't listen to them.
That's right. That's right. I suspect that's exactly what happened, and they didn't listen. They pursued the truth, and as a result of that fight, we now have the United States of America instead of the British colonies of America.
Has Crossfire been translated to any other languages?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I think there's a Chinese edition, which I find kind of interesting. I'm just wondering how many Chinese actually want to know about the Kennedy assassination. I know it's been translated into Japanese, Spanish. There's a UK edition. Also, a whole bunch, actually, come think of it. It's been translated into Bulgarian and several other places.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, but I'm learning Mandarin. I lived in Taiwan for 2 years, so Chinese actually would be a good. I'm glad to hear that it's in Chinese, actually.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So, Jim, you were talking earlier about all these, you brought up these examples of all these lies our presidents have told us in the past. And when you were saying that, one of the things I was thinking of is the Dwight Eisenhower speech, his farewell speech. Do you think if people really understood what he was talking about when he was talking about the military-industrial complex, it could have been fortuitous of the JFK assassination?
No, I don't believe that most people at that time, of course, everybody keeps harking back to him now because he was really, he really had given us some foreknowledge. But at the time, nobody quite understood what he was talking about because the military-industrial complex at that time was such an integral part of our society that nobody really stopped to think of them as a separate entity that maybe we ought to be cautious of. Keep in mind that when he said that would have, seems like he said that in his farewell speech, so that would have been 1959, I suppose. We had just come off of World War II. And everybody was just so happy and thankful that the war was over and we won. We were God's gift to democracy and freedom, and, everything was cool, and the GIs had all come back and jumped on the GI Bill. A lot of them had gone to college and bettered themselves, and they were all buying homes in the suburbs, and everything was just kind of hunky-dory there in the 50s, So, no, I don't think at the time most people really realized what he was trying to warn about. And even though he did a pretty good job of saying that we must be careful of the power, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex. Hey, you guys, think about the 50s sci-fi movies, okay, the blob from space and, aliens from Arcturus or whatever. And whenever the monster or whenever the space people landed, what's the first thing everybody said? Call the Army. Right?
Yeah.
So we were in that kind of mindset where, if we have a problem, call the Army.
Sure.
And then if the Army says, okay, we have to evacuate this beach, and we have to evacuate this town, everybody went, okay. And they just go willingly do it. Because we had no idea at that time, and most people to this day don't have any idea that the military is a weapon, essentially.
Yeah.
And, if good people are in charge of that weapon, that's great. But what happens if bad people get in charge of that weapon?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, and
right, and then all of a sudden the patriots become the terrorists.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right,
and that's kind of what's happening right now, isn't it?
Yeah,
If you try to talk about the Constitution and you try to talk about our freedoms and you're in favor of the Second Amendment and the 10th Amendment and the 9th Amendment, well, you might be a terrorist.
Yeah.
Right. I found this old video on YouTube of Jim Garrison. It was probably about 20 or 30 minutes long, and he was talking about, at the time, if you questioned the JFK assassination, everybody thought you were a terrorist or you were crazy or you were, demonized, and we see that a lot. And I thought, well, that's pretty much what is going on today with the truth movement, people coming out about 9/11 or, things going on. You mentioned healthcare. We question the narrative there with vaccination or pharmaceutical drugs or things like that. It's like you're sort of looked at as crazy, or it's very Orwellian, as I think you pointed out. It's the opposite of what it really is,
That's right. In fact, a good example of that is water fluoridation. Prior to World War II, fluoride, waste product of the aluminum manufacturing product. It was used as a rat poison. It was a poison. Then the Nazis found out that they could put just a little bit of fluoride in the water of their concentration camps, and it kept the inmates docile and non-resistant. And that's why that in almost all of the antidepressants being prescribed today, one of the ingredients is fluoride. It keeps you dulled down and dumbed down. And, of course, then when they started trying to fluoridate the water back in the 50s, there was some very, very stiff opposition. But it was shouted down by the American Dental Association, who somehow had become convinced that a little bit of fluoride in your water might keep down the tooth decay in children, but only between the ages of 6 and 12. Okay, in fact, they were very explicit in saying do not let children under age 6 swallow any of this fluoride toothpaste. In fact, if you look on most of the fluoride toothpaste tubes today, it says, if you swallow some of this, contact the Centers for Disease Control. So, now wait a minute. Who in the world wants to put poison in their system? Yeah. But yet that controversy is still going on to this very day because the corporations that have the money and the power and the resources to actually study the thing independently and learn whether or not it's really causing a problem or not, they're all already on to the pro-fluoride, and so you don't get any of these studies like that. And the ones that are doing studies usually are in Europe or somewhere, some other country, and they're easy to dismiss.
Yeah.
And, just to switch gears just a little bit, I saw one of your lectures, and you were talking on YouTube and about the Council on Foreign Relations, or the CFR, and you said that, well, first of all, what is that, and what is the connection to the presidency and the CFR?
Well, the Council on Foreign Relations was formed right after World War I as a reaction to the fact that the U.S. Senate declined to sign the United States onto the old League of Nations. That was an early attempt at a one world government, one world United Nations type thing. And the Senate at that time, even though Woodrow Wilson, the U.S. president, had kind of conceived of the whole thing and was pushing it, they said, no, we're not ready to give up our sovereignty. And so they declined to ratify joining the League of Nations. And so a bunch of the globalist financiers, bankers, and the people who look on the United States as merely the North American branch of their worldwide corporate system, they founded the Council on Foreign Relations and its sister organization, the Royal Institute of International Affairs in England, and they were using the money of the South American Diamond King, and he himself said that the whole purpose was to create a secret society that would blend the economies of the United Kingdom and the United States. And the whole purpose was to try to get them to get powerful people involved and convince the public that what we really need to do is create a United Nations, and then everybody joins in, and then have the whole world run through some supernatural entity such as the United Nations. And they really got it started during World War II, and there towards the end, when it became pretty obvious that the Allies were going to win, all of a sudden, instead of calling the Allies, or instead of calling it a joint operation of Britain and America and France, all of a sudden it became the United Nations. And then, of course, right after the war, they held formal meetings and formally created the United Nations, and it's been an argument ever since over who should have the control of our lives, our own representatives elected here within our national boundaries, or some bureaucrat that belongs to this global organization like United Nations.
Right, which, I mean, we don't, these are all unelected officials. All people, or I don't know if they're even officials, but all these, it's like a secret government in plain sight, they're in
exactly, because, they're appointed by the president. In fact, let me tell you, here's, talking about a secret government in plain sight, I'm sure you've heard of the National Security Council, right? Yeah. And in fact, every time that we're invading another country or we're sending drones in to kill somebody, and whenever all this stuff's going on, if you'll really look, it says this was approved by the National Security Council. Well, that all sounds pretty good. That you think that we have a committee somewhere, and maybe you've got some diverse opinions, and when they can all agree on something, maybe that's something that's really beneficial and necessary. But wait a minute. I ask you guys, who is the National Security Council? Do you know?
I have no idea who those people are.
No. Well, don't feel bad, because neither does most everybody else.
Right.
They see it and they think, oh, this is great. But here's the deal. The National Security Council is actually only 4 people. The President, the Vice President, Secretaries of State and Defense. Okay? Well, yep. And then anybody they decide to bring in there too, like if they're dealing with Afghanistan, then they bring in some chiefs and some officials and some experts on Afghanistan, okay? But the National Security Council basically is just those 4 people: President, Vice President, Secretary of State, and Defense. Now, wait a minute. The President chooses his Vice President and who will be his Secretaries of State and Defense. So, oops, we don't have a committee anywhere. All we have is this increasingly imperial president who makes the decisions on war and peace, famine and feast, whatever. It's really not right, but most people, are not paying attention, and they're not being told. And, of course, that comes back to one of my biggest bugaboos, which is the corporate mass media. And I know because I've worked in it, okay? But it's under very tight control. In fact, right now, today, virtually everything you see and hear in the media is controlled by one of about 5 multinational corporations. And these corporations have interlocking directorships and interlocking ownership. So actually, you've got a handful of people who control everything you see and hear. And I'm not just talking about news. I'm talking about records. I'm talking about cable TV. I'm talking about newspapers, magazines, billboards, everything you see and hear. And it's all under the control of 5 corporations.
Right. It's true, yeah. It's very, or what would George Carlin say? Everything that matters is all of the choices that matter are all like limited, but then you can have like 37 flavors of ice cream.
Right. Well, let's look at the election, or rather the selection of 2000. Okay, you've got Al Gore, a Democrat, who is the scion of a wealthy oil family and a member of Skull and Bones, running against George W. Bush, the scion of a wealthy oil family and a member of Skull and Bones. So you get Tweedledee, you get Tweedledum. It's really incredible. And then in 2008, we took the National Socialism of the Bush administration, which they had prettied up. That National Socialism in the German acronym is Nazi. So it's gotten kind of, that National Socialism has kind of gotten a bad rap. So they didn't call it that. They called it neoconservatism, okay, or the neocons. So you got Bush and his neocons, National Socialism, and being opposed by Barack Hussein Obama and his Marxist socialism. So you get socialism either way you go, But you can have a left-wing socialism or you can have a right-wing socialism. And yes, you all are correct. This is just an affront to the sensibilities of the public, because this is nothing more than the old used car salesman scam. You go downtown to buy a bicycle, and the used car salesman grabs you, pulls you onto the lot, and starts really glad-handing you, and then says, look, which one do you like better here, this green one or that red one? Now, the red one, that's a chick magnet. Man, get that one, and you'll have a date by Friday night. Everything's great. But now the green one, that gets better gas mileage, and it'd probably be a little smarter thing to do with that. Which one do you like? And you go, well, I guess maybe I ought to go for the green one, because I really don't need to be wasting money on gasoline with the prices going up. And they, well, come on in here, sign here, and blah, blah, blah. And the next thing you know, you're walking back down the street, and you just bought a green car, and you suddenly realize, I came down here to buy a bicycle. I didn't want a car. Right? So they offer us, you can get National Socialism or you can get Marxist Socialism, but it doesn't matter, you're still going to get socialism. And what if you don't want socialism? And the thing is, socialism in and of itself, kind of like democracy in and of itself, is not necessarily a bad thing. Medicare, Social Security, those are socialist-type programs, but they're probably necessary and they help a lot of people. So you don't want to just totally say, you know, that we can't have any social programs, but you have to be very, very careful, and you have to limit this socialism. Why? Well, because anytime you have a social program, no matter how benevolent it sounds, it requires central administration. You've got to have somebody somewhere who's going to sit there and make sure that it works properly. And once you have that central authority, then the rich and powerful know they can buy it up. And then that's how they get total control over everything. Food, water, air, education, transportation, health care, everything.
They never account for human nature, the greed, you know, that happens.
That's right, because what do they say, you know, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is what we just continually see.
Yeah.
So this is why it's up to us to police the government and make sure that they understand they're working for us. And, you know, we need to, instead of listening to what politicians say, you need to forget what they say, because they'll say anything to get elected. It's an unfortunate truism that the way you can tell if a politician is lying to you is if his or her mouth's moving. They have to. They have to. Nobody who tells the absolute truth will ever get elected to office. So they have to lie, and this is not a condemnation, it's just a statement of fact. Okay, so don't listen to what they say. Watch what they do. And then if they vote on issues the way you think they should vote, then you vote them back into office. And if they don't, then you vote them out of office. And you know what, guys? That's not a radical idea. That's actually the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a question. You know, what is your definition of the truth, and why is the truth so important to the human race?
Well, you know, there's huge arguments over exactly what is truth, and I totally understand that. And truth is indeed hard to come by, because on almost any given issue or incident, you can always find there's always two sides. And so the truth oftentimes falls kind of right in the middle of a gray area, and it's kind of hard to tell which side is correct. But you can try for the truth, okay? I was taught that back in Journalism 101. They say, you know, go past the headlines and look at the stories, and then look where's the source on that. In other words, if you read in the newspaper a big, long article about how safe nuclear energy is, you better check and see, well, now, wait a minute, this paper is saying that, but the same paper, where did they get this? Well, it turns out it comes from some spokesman or spokesperson for the Atomic Industrial Forum. Well, that's a pro-nuclear industry organization, you know, for lobbying for nuclear power. So whoops, wait a minute, you're going to have to take that story with a huge grain of salt, because you're only getting one version of that story, okay? See what I'm saying? So to find truth, you have to read and keep your mind open to everything and hear all sides. And when somebody says one thing, you need to go and find out, well, what is there anybody saying something contrary? And if there is, what are they saying? And do they have any facts, data, evidence to support that? In other words, if you're going to be a fully functioning, free citizen, you need to start thinking for yourself.
Do you think you can ever go down too many rabbit holes?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can really get bogged down. In fact, I'll give you my classic warning. When you start down the rabbit hole, you can always stop. You can always say, okay, that's it. I don't want to hear anymore. I don't want to know anymore. I'm just going to stop right here. But, folks, you can never go back. Because once you know something, you know it. And you can't unknow it. Okay? So, yeah, be careful. If you really want to know truth, keep digging, keep going down the rabbit hole. If you get to a point where that's it, you're happy enough, you don't want to know any more truth, then stop.
My impression of you is you're really open and friendly, and there's some people that are in this field that let the negativity get to them, and you seem to manage that. I don't know everything about you, but you seem to manage that. You're cracking jokes, you're friendly, you're open, how do you do it? Or did you go through a time where it did really get to you,
Oh, well, yeah, you have to keep catching yourself up. And number one, I'm always interrogating myself, hey, Jim, is that really true? Do you really know that? How do you know that? Maybe you are just a conspiracy theorist. Maybe you just see a conspiracy and everything. So I stop and I back off and I get very objective and I look at all the evidence and I go, nope, it's all there. Now, how do you keep a good attitude? Well, it's real simple. You have to understand that what we think of as our daily reality is just a huge cosmic joke. Okay? It's just a storyline that we've bought into, and we're doing all this. And one of the biggest fears, one of the most basic fears everyone has, is the fear of death. And that's because we've been conditioned into thinking that when you die, that's the end of it. Okay, everything goes black, you're gone, and everything you've thought, everything you worked for, everything you've done, it doesn't matter, because that's the end of it. But I happen to know, not just guess, not suspect, not believe, I know that that's not the end of it. And how can I say that? Well, because I'm being brought up in the 40s and 50s and 60s. Science was a huge part of the education. Going to the moon, being an astronaut, exploring space. That was a huge agenda back then. Today it's all kind of by the wayside. Today it seems to be, let's just go out and party and have fun, because I don't think there's going to be much tomorrow. So that seems to be the attitude. But back then it was all open. The future was bright. We're going into space. We're going to colonize other worlds, yada, yada, okay? And as a result, I have carefully tried to blend my philosophies and with equal parts knowledge, research, and science, and true knowledge. And science tells us that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It can only change form. And when you back off and look at us, we are energy beings, all right? It's just, unfortunately, we're trapped in these meat sacks, okay? And these meat sacks, that it ages and it grows old, and eventually the meat sack gives out. But then again, back to science. Science tells you that and they've registered this and they've demonstrated this. When a person dies, that energy field that energizes them, the New Age people would call it the aura, but it's the energy field that's around every individual. That energy field does not dissipate. It lifts up and it moves off. So when you die, you're just going to go do something else. And we have every reason to believe that, because you have people with these near-death experiences, and we have people who claim that they've gone psychically to the other world and then come back. And they all say the same thing. Yeah, there's something going on over there, In fact, I was feeling quite good. I wanted to stay there, but they told me, no, you have to come back. So I came back. I'm back alive. So, I mean, and those stories just go on and on and on. So anyway, once you understand that death is not the end of everything, then you understand, hey, it's time to relax, have a good time, do the best you can do, try to make the world the best you can, and don't sweat the small stuff. And everything is the small stuff.
That is great advice. You know, we, Christine and I, when we started this show, we were inspired. We saw you had done an interview with, I think it was Project Camelot, and you talked about following your bliss. And that's something we often talked about when we wanted to start the show, is that it was just something we wanted to follow, even though we weren't getting paid. Yeah. As you say, there's no money in it. But we thought, well, you know, maybe someday we're just going to follow it anyway and just do it. And you know, we look back at that interview as like one of our kind of inspirations to start it. So, so good advice indeed.
And how long ago was that?
Oh, a little over a year.
Yeah,
about a year. So for a year, you've been doing what you love, and you seem to be doing quite well with it.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah. And we started it. I was living in a different country. And, and here, so like I'd be up at like 3:00 in the morning, and April would be at, 1:00, but we were doing it. Like, I don't know how we managed to do it. I guess, yeah, we were following our bliss. The bliss gave us energy, I guess. Yeah.
I don't understand that either. I can do pretty good until about 3 in the morning, and then I start fading. I guess that's what happens when you get old. You can broken down.
I know people my age that can't stay up that late. Please.
Oh, yeah, no, I can't stay up that late, not at all. But but I have children, so they keep me up. They get me up early in the morning, so it's really hard for me to stay up late. And speaking of that, my oldest is going into the 6th grade next year, and I want to homeschool him because I don't trust his system anymore. I'm a little scared to send him back to school, and I wanted to know, you've written a lot of books, and we didn't have time to talk about all of them, but do you consider yourself a historian, and do you, if so, like, what book would you recommend that would be good to start, teaching him American history?
Well, I don't truly consider myself a historian. I consider myself a journalist, but then, see, unfortunately, there are no journals anymore, and the few journals there are under total control of these 5 corporations. So I'm a journalist, but I don't have a journal. So I have to communicate in my books, okay? Now, in my books, if you want to try, you need to look for alternative works. One that I would highly recommend is Howard Zinn, Z-I-N-N.
Oh, the People's History?
Yeah, the People's History of the United States. I think Oliver Stone, along with someone else, just recently came out with a book about Hidden America or something like that. So, yeah, look for these. And I'm not saying disregard conventional history. I'm not saying that you have to believe all the alternative histories. I'm just saying study both and see which one it has the most evidence to back it up, the most documentation, and what makes the most sense to you. In other words, we're back to thinking for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
We are all products of the conditioning process that has been going on our whole life, regarding wherever you were born, wherever you grew up, the people you came into contact with, your parents, your church, your schools. They've all shaped us into the people that we are now. And hopefully, for most people, that's a good thing. You're stable, and you're self-confident, and you have some modicum of education, and you're ready to tackle the world, okay? But this is also the very real possibility that a lot of what you were taught is BS.
Yeah, definitely. With this, especially in our public school systems today, the way that
right. Well, do y'all know who founded our public education system?
Probably the Rockefellers or Rothschilds.
Yeah, John D. Rockefeller. Yeah. And he was quoted as saying, "I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers."
Yeah.
Okay? So this is what school is doing. In fact, I've got a 5-year-old granddaughter, smart as a whip, sharp as everything. We always joke, and she's 5 going on 18. Okay? And she got in trouble in school last week because the teacher told her, "You're not in your assigned seat. You need to go sit over there." And she said, "No, I don't want to." Oops. You know, so we had to get on her, and the school got on her, and she had to write, "I will not challenge my teacher," because it's her classroom, you know. So in other words, what they're doing now is conditioning her to obey authority. All right? And that in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. If you want to live and do well in our society, you better be prepared to yield to authority, okay? But that does not mean you should give up your autonomy and just give up to every authority comes along. Sometimes there's a time to say, no, I don't want to.
Yeah. But there's a difference, I think, between just respecting people in positions of authority and giving your power to authority, you know?
Exactly. Thank you. That was very good.
I'm a teacher, and I try to, you know, if I make a mistake, I encourage my students to tell me. I'm never, you know, to challenge me. If they don't like a story, I want them to tell me why. They don't have to necessarily like everything we read in class. But at the same time, they have to have respect for me. They can't be like cracking jokes or playing with their iPhone while I'm teaching. That's very rude.
Exactly. Exactly. I am just so fortunate in that I was in grade school back at a time before we had all of this bureaucracy and all of this social services and all of these psychotropic drugs, because, as I mentioned earlier, I was an avid reader. I read everything, and so we'd get in a big class and they'd say, "Okay, open your books to, you know, page 10, and we're going to read the next chapter." Well, you know, zoom, I'm through. I've already read the next chapter, and everybody else is still struggling along. So I'm looking out the window, okay, because I'm bored. All right. Now, the worst I got was the teacher come around, rap me on the knuckles, and say, "Jimmy, stay with the rest of the class." Yes, ma'am. Okay. But today, they would send me down to the school nurse who has been taught and conditioned into saying, "Oh, well, he probably has attention deficit disorder, and we need to prescribe him some antidepressants, and they'll get you on some kind of drug regimen." You know, so it's really just incredible what's going on within the education system.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And I'll tell you something else that scares me, being in the book writing business and having such a love for books, is I live in a rural county here in Texas, not too far from Dallas-Fort Worth. My wife was the art teacher in high school for many years. She recently retired, and she called up the teacher that took her place as the art teacher and offered her help in setting up, this was last spring, setting up the senior art exhibit. And every year I've gone to help her a lot, so I knew about this. They take all the best artwork from the seniors, and they would set up a showing public thing in the school library. And all the parents, everybody came to look at their artwork. It was really kind of a neat deal. And so she called up and told the new teacher who'd taken her place, said, "I'm offering to help you set up the senior exhibit." And she said, "There's not going to be one this year." And she's kind of shocked and says, "Well, why not?" And she says, "Well, because we can't get use of the library." "Why not?" "Well, it seems they're taking all the books out of the library and turning it into an internet cafe." So in other words, you can go. And then I was talking with one of her friends that was an English teacher, and she teaches English literature. And according to the core curriculum that they now have, the students who are supposedly learning English literature, they're not required to read even one book. Now, I ask you, how's anybody going to know English literature if they're not required to read a book?
Wow.
But that's where we are. The whole world's topsy-turvy.
Yeah.
Black is white, and white is black, and up is down, down is up.
We're in 1984.
Yep.
Yes, indeed.
Yep. War, peace is war.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's true. Obama.
Yeah, what do they? Yeah, freedom freedom bombs or something like that?
Yeah, something like that. It's, you know, our motto seems to be, we want peace, and if you don't want peace, we'll bomb the hell out of you.
Exactly. It's crazy. Well, Jim, it's been tremendous having you on the show. I mean, we're just about out of time here, but it's been so great, and I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day to talk to us, because we're such huge fans of your work, and it's been so meaningful to what we've done. And but before you go, I want to remind the audience where they can find you. What's the best website to locate you and your work?
Well, oddly enough, it's jimmars.com. JIMMARRS.com. And you can get my books there on my website, plus stories that I post from time to time that I think you might find interesting and that you probably will not find ballyhooed in the corporate mass media. And then also, of course, you can get my books at any bookstore and at, of course, Amazon.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jim.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And
all right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I was on holiday with Laurence Olivier. We had decided that 9/11 was an intelligence operation. We'd all known about JFK, he had so many mistresses. The CIA shot him. Castro could never have done it. It was clear we had become realists, conspiracy realists. How would we let everyone know was the question. We decided to buy T-shirts that told the contents of our hearts and minds to the world. We went to shop.truthertees.com. Even though the internet hadn't been invented at the time, we went to shop.truthertees.com. There we purchased Conspiracy Realist T-shirts, one of a kind, sold only at shop.truthertees.com. 100% cotton in men's and women's fitted sizes. I won't tell you which one I'm wearing.
Hi, welcome back. Thanks for listening to Truther Talk. Christine, how was that? How was that interview? What'd you think of that?
It was amazing. It was amazing. I wanted to keep going on. I felt like I didn't want to take any more of his time, but it was wonderful, and it was just so inspiring. And it was so, I think one of the parts that really inspires me is that he just, he knows all this stuff. He's very professional. He's had a lot of life experience, you know, some good, some bad. But he's still energetic and curious as ever, you know?
I know.
So,
it is inspiring, and I liked, he was an integral part of our wanting to start our show, and I'm glad I told him that, because, you know, I just think it's nice to be able to tell the person that inspires you that they inspire you. And because we watched his interview on Project Camelot, we'd both seen it, and we liked when he was asked how he stays kind of positive, or how to kind of like combat all the negativity, and he just said, well, you follow your bliss. You know, if you like doing this, you just do it. And then, you know, if it's like fishing, or if it's, you know, if you he's like, I like journalism. I'm curious. You know, I read books. I'm an avid reader. I liked how he talked about, I pictured him as a little boy being this avid reader of all these things. It was so cute, and he's such a nice person, and such a pleasant I wish I could like meet him in person.
Yeah.
If I ever see him here in this area at a conference or something, I'm going to try to go.
you should do that. I'll go with you. We should just, that would be
because
great.
his energy is so great. I just want to be in his presence. I want to shake his hand or give him a hug. And,
yeah,
you know,
totally. I know.
And he just seems like he'd be sweet to embrace you like that too. And I just, so he's a really interesting guy. And I mean, I can't imagine what, you know, this thing would look like, what we're doing now, and all this research, had it not been for somebody like him investigating JFK. I mean, when he said, I don't know where he found this statistic, but 85% of the United States and the population think that they question the official story of JFK, and I really think that
it's because
is
of
because
him.
I really think that's because of him.
Yeah.
Because where else did they get that number of people? Because most people saw the movie that's based on his book.
Yeah.
So that's how the people have come to question it, you know. And that's a good movie. It's a long movie, but given the length and the details that are in his book, they actually shorten it, condense it a lot. They get to as much as they can in 3-hour period.
It is. It was very, you know, I I have to admit, it's a little embarrassing, but I just saw it the day before we interviewed Jim Mars.
Yeah.
Because, and I would tell people that are, you know, like kind of, they're in the movement or that are doing what we're doing, that they'd always ask me, had I seen JFK, and I'd be like, no, I haven't. They're like, oh my God, how could you? What's wrong with you? And you call yourself a truther, you know, whatever. I was like, I just didn't make my way to it, but, it is very fascinating, and it's kind of creepy too, when you kind of realize that there's I think a lot of people, when Kennedy happened, you know, or when Kennedy was assassinated, a lot of people were under the assumption that we lived in this world that was just, maybe the president was like the highest power, but then once you start digging deeper, you find out that that's not the case, and it kind of like, it really shakes your foundation of what you know, what is actually, who actually is in control, you know?
Right, and I think that given, you know, that he lived through it, and he was there at the time, you know, it was in his backyard because he's from Texas, and, you know, he was a college student at the time when it happened, and he was working on the school newspaper and all that, was really interesting perspective, because I hadn't really thought of that before, of like I guess I did think that, you know, just from having watched old movies and things like that, that at that time the country did have a level of innocence, and it really kind of took that innocence away. It sort of, you know, lifted the veil, if you will, and sort of, to a certain extent, I mean, it didn't lift it all the way, but it lifted a little bit to where people were so shocked, you know, that something like that could happen, for one, and then two, you know, that they were just so willing to believe this story, even though it was so far-fetched. It's like once you get to it, and he was talking about his first sort of red flag was the gun, because the gun was such a piece of crap that, you know, you couldn't shoot anything with it. It was like a joke when you're from Texas, and, you know, most people around there are savvy with guns, or a lot of people are, and he was growing up and grew up around, you know, using guns and hunting and things like that. So he was like, what? That's not a good gun. How was he able to use that? That was sort of his first red flag. And then I was really impressed. We were talking in the beginning during the intro about how he's a real journalist. I mean, talk about that. Over 100 people he interviewed, face to face.
You hear that, internet journalist? That's what you need to do.
For reals. I mean, this guy, over, you know, hundreds of people, you know, and you were talking about that article about that, you know, that guy wrote where he was talking about vaccines and stuff. It's like, how many of these people who write that stuff ever interview one person who's vaccine damaged?
Yeah,
you know, do they ever once get that story, you know? And they don't.
And he didn't bother looking at the YouTube. Oh, don't get me started. I was so laugh because I'm just so frustrated. And I think, I don't know, we've talked about this before, but I don't know, I'm just the type of person, I will ask somebody why they think the way that they do, instead of be like, oh, they're crazy. I don't agree with that, or that sounds silly, or, you know, I'm like, well, damn, that's crazy. Tell me why you think the way that you do. Enlighten me, or show me something I don't know. Or at least tell me, and then let me determine if you're crazy or you're a jerk or afterwards. But at least get to the bottom of the story. You know, at least do that. People are fucking lazy, man, or fucking, I don't know what the hell they are, but
they're lazy, or they're single-minded, or they're just, who knows? I don't know, but Jim Mars, like, when he said that, I was like, holy crap, like, wow, you know, that's a lot of people, and that's a real investigation. I mean, he's talking to people who were there at the time of the incident, who saw, you know, who witnessed where the shots were coming from, and, you know, the way that his head flew back and all this stuff, and that you don't get in the official story. It's just a complete fabrication. And, you know, so it's amazing that people would believe it, but then given the context of what he described, he said nobody was thinking like that at all. Nobody knew what the CIA was. They'd never heard of it. You know, and that was a big, that was when I was really trying to get that question out, and I was glad I was able to ask him about when did he connect it to the intelligence agencies, and he was like, oh yeah, you know, because that was actually, nobody really knew what that was, so who would know to look for it?
Yeah.
And then, so then once you first started to, and he said it was after the Watergate incident, because then that's when people started to understand that there were people in government that there was a secret government. They didn't know there was a secret government yet. They thought that everything was open, everything was, full disclosure. And then they realized that there is a secret government in plain sight, because these guys have buildings. Yeah. They recruit employees and all that kind of stuff. But what they do is covert, and nobody knows who works there. And or if you do, you don't know what they actually do, and what their job is. But then once they realized that there were people and they went into other countries, and they would do these black ops, which are, if you look at the movie, it was the Donald Sutherland character who kind of goes over what the CIA does. Yeah. He explains that to Garrison, and Jim Garrison, who's the district attorney who did the investigation, and Jim Mars, based a lot of his book on researching Jim Garrison's investigation, and so he describes that, and in the book, I believe, because I tried to read the book, I can't say that it's a really long book.
Long.
I got it from the library. I got it from the library, and I got through as much as I could before I had to return it. But the Donald Sutherland character is based on several characters, several whistleblowers who secretly, but see, that was the thing, that reason that Garrison couldn't present that stuff in court was because none of these people, he knew it, but it was all hearsay, because
they won't come.
They would not come forward, and you can't blame them for not wanting to come forward about it, but they'd be dead if they weren't anyway. We don't know. So a lot of people surrounding that cover-up did die or suicided or whatever. And so, but anyway, it's really interesting, because I really wanted to know that, because I had never thought of that, the fact that they didn't even really realize that there was a CIA, or that this kind of thing even went on, But I guess, you could say that even though he was very integral in a lot of people waking up and realizing that the government is not what it seems, and maybe having a healthy distrust for the government, there's still a lot of people who will believe the official story of 9/11, or something like that is equally as ridiculous and has just as many holes and fabrications as the JFK story, but
if not more.
Well, it's a bigger, it was a bigger happening in a way, because, in JFK, it was just one guy, even though he was the president. It was, the 9/11 killed thousands of people, and it was, brought down 3 buildings, and a chunk of the Pentagon, and, it was a big thing, obviously. And so for our generation, I'd say that was sort of I wanted to ask him about this, but gosh, just wasn't enough time. But Jim Mars wrote a book about 9/11, his investigation there, and I'd be curious to know, what his investigation found. Because it's just, like I said, I didn't have time to ask him, and I know that, he's a real journalist, so he would have investigated it thoroughly and not just, I don't know.
Not just half-assed,
not just do a Google search.
Yeah, or went to Wikipedia or Quackwatch.
Right, whatever.
Quackwatch, that's a new joke, Quackwatch. Go to Quackwatch. You want to know? Go to Quackwatch.
Yeah, go to Quackwatch. It's, God.
Yeah.
But it's...
So, yeah, it's so funny. I remember my mother, when 9/11 happened, I was, traumatized. I remember my mom coming to me, a few hours after it happened. She's like, I never really thought about it, but she goes, this is probably the first seriously big dramatic thing that you've experienced, or traumatic thing. And she mentioned the Kennedy assassination, too. And said that was she was like, you didn't go through the Martin Luther King assassinations or the Kennedy assassinations, like we did. Yeah, so this is huge for you. And I was like, what? But now as I've got, as through the years too, I'm just like, oh, I understand, a lot of people love Kennedy of all races. They really, really liked him, and when that happened, I didn't really care, when I was a kid, I'd hear about it, I was like, oh, that sucks, but, I didn't really,
right, sure.
And same thing with Martin Luther King, people of all different races, not just black people liked Martin Luther King, and white people liked them, other people, that weren't black like Martin Luther King. And same thing with Kennedy, and it was traumatic for everybody,
Yeah.
And devastating, and it's just, I mean, I'm sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, like, I can imagine, you know, for us, when we saw the whole 9/11 thing happen, when we had Richard Grove on, he described it as a snuff film, and he said it caused everybody who saw it with post-traumatic stress syndrome. And I think that that's true. You could say we have a whole nation of post-traumatic stress because everybody was so afraid. And even now, like, when they show it to kids in school who maybe didn't live through it, or were too young to remember it, you know, but then they show it to them, and it's very traumatizing. And, you know, when I was a kid, no one showed me the JFK assassination. I didn't hear, I mean, we heard about it a little bit, but it was kind of like John F. Kennedy was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. Boom.
Yeah, that was like that was one of my, I was into trivia a lot. I remember that being trivia questions. It's just something on Jeopardy that you have to memorize, and you know the facts. Who assassinated him? Oh, Lee Harvey Oswald. Oh, okay. Yeah. That was it. That was the end of story.
Exactly. It was just Lee Harvey Oswald. That was the end of story. And so you never really heard the official story, to let alone question it. It was the same thing I said about 9/11 before. It's like when I first heard it and I believed it, it was because I didn't really know the official story. It's the same with John F. Kennedy, JFK assassination. I didn't know enough about it to actually question it until I saw the Oliver Stone film. And I want to say I was about 19 or so, like that when 19 or 20, I don't remember, when that movie came out. And I went and saw that with my parents. So I was still living at home. And that was the first time I learned that my dad had actually been into that, like in the late 60s, early 70s. Yeah, he had actually been into questioning those assassinations, the Kennedy assassinations, because he was a fan of the Kennedys, John and Robert. And I don't know, he didn't mention Martin Luther King, but I bet if I asked him, he would say that he did in fact question.
So wait, was he trying to research on his own, or before the movie he was just like, damn, I knew there was, he was like, I always knew that there was something fishy about that Kennedy assassination. Was it like that? Or was he trying to find his own information on his own about it?
No, he was trying to find his own information on his own about it. In the counterculture, like the hippie kind of, I mean, he doesn't like being called that, but that was sort of the 1960s culture at that time, you know, the people who listened to Jimi Hendrix and, you know, that kind of thing. And there was a music movement and all of that. It wasn't uncommon for people to have deep, long conversations about the possible government conspiracy to assassinate the Kennedys or Martin Luther King. And so he did question that. And so it wasn't, but I didn't know that until I saw the movie. And I didn't know that he had actually been into it, that he had actually researched it. And then later I remember talking to my grandma about it, because this was before my grandma had died, and she was like, oh yeah, he was totally into that. He used to spend wee hours of the night, and he would be talking about it, and he said it was actually the RFK. It was when Robert Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's younger brother, was assassinated, that he went, boom, this is a conspiracy. Like, he knew it right then, because it was
it's too much. Like all,
it was
yeah,
too much.
yeah.
Like in the movie, you see, and I don't know if this is dramatized or not, but Jim Garrison's wife, who's played by Sissy Spacek, because like everybody in that movie.
Hollywood in that movie, yeah.
Oh my God! Like anyone who had balls to be in that movie, because from what I understand, the Jim Garrison part was actually offered to Harrison Ford, but he was scared. He didn't want to do it. Yeah, exactly.
Richard Grove contacted Harrison Ford. I don't know if you talked about it.
I remember that. Yeah, I think you did say that on our show. What is it? Why?
Oh, man, I'm Indiana Jones, man. I'm so disappointed in you.
Oh, that's funny.
Man, you think about it. I love Indiana Jones. I'm sorry, but go on. I'm going off on a tangent.
No, yeah, so anyway, so it was just kind of interesting, because I never thought to question it. I never knew that my dad was, you know, a quote conspiracy theorist kind of guy either, you know. I didn't really know that. I just kind of, I didn't know. I knew he liked the Kennedys, but I didn't, and I knew he liked Martin Luther King, and I knew he was, you know, fans of theirs. But as far as like, him questioning the official story, I didn't really know. And, you know, and when I say that, you know, my dad was, you know, fans of theirs, I mean, you know, I'm not trying to say that I am, because I know people are going to be like, oh, she doesn't know the truth about the Kennedys. No, you know, I know that these guys, look, I don't go in for the politics. I don't go in for the politicians, and I don't, I think we talk about this on the show sometimes, is that we don't like to place people on pedestals and
definitely.
say that they're. Kennedy was John F. Kennedy. I don't know much about Robert, but I know JFK was very highly flawed. I know that he didn't do, everything correctly, and I think that, he made a lot of problems for himself. But, I mean, was there a plot to assassinate him? Yeah. And why?
Well, I think the bottom line, too, is that we were lied to and tricked to, too. Not only did somebody get killed, but it's also an attack on the American public because, they're fucking with our head and they're lying to us. We're putting our trust in people that we're supposed to trust, and they lie to us.
Exactly. And I think Kennedy, if he was assassinated for anything, a lot of people like to post that speech where he talks about secret societies and things like that that he gives. But I mean that there might be some truth to that. But I really think that he
pissed a lot of people off.
Right, but I mean, if you really think about what the big motivator would be, I mean, I'm sure that there were several motivations, but doesn't it always seem that these guys get assassinated when they try to bring down the Federal Reserve?
Oh yeah, you're right.
Right,
yeah.
because he was planning on the United States as printing their own currency, which was silver based. And I forget the code. It was an executive order to start, and it wouldn't have actually eliminated the Federal Reserve. It would have been in competition with it. So I mean,
well, you know what? That's when Gaddafi got assassinated. When he was basically trying to have his own currency too and become independent, and not trying to take over, but to become in competition. Yeah.
So it's the bankers, and the Kennedys. It's interesting because wasn't it when we interviewed Fritz Springmeier that he actually said that they are one of the elite families?
Yeah.
And they are tied into one of the
bloodlines. But you know what? Too, I mean, who's to say that everybody in the elite family in those bloodlines they don't all have the same agenda? I'm sure there are people that were that interbreed or interbreed. Yeah, I'm sure that happens too. They interbreed too, but I mean like that fight with each other and don't agree, and so I mean we don't know these people. We only can speculate by the evidence that we that we read or that we're given or by observations we make, but we don't know everything.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that you're more likely to be assassinated if you are in the elite families and you question the status quo of the elite. And then, if you kind of like step out of line, they're going to go after, they like eat their own before they try to come after people on the outside. They don't care as much about everybody else. It's more like if you're in the clique, but then you try to step out of line, you try and give away too many secrets.
Yeah, you get out the gang. It's like trying to get out of a gang,
Exactly. Trying to go against the grain there,
April and I were kind of joking around earlier today. We were talking about the royal family and how like those poor kids like William and Harry, how they probably have to how will they get out if they ever wanted to? How can they escape? There's really nowhere they can go. They can't they would have to fake their own death and get plastic surgery. Now this is our imaginative playful side. We don't really know. We're just fucking around, we're just like, oh, what if this, but we're just like, they'd have to probably, it's a trap. And it's interesting though, two people look at these families, these, that have all this great wealth and stuff, but maybe the grass is greener on the other side. Maybe it's not so pleasurable. Or, maybe it's not as chic and fantastical as we would all like to imagine,
Well, I certainly wouldn't want to be a Kennedy, that's for damn sure, because those people, they get assassinated. The Kennedys, they know how to assassinate the Kennedys.
Yeah, but the royal family, man, they stay around forever. It's like, damn,
they never die.
They're like immortal.
They are. They're creepy. But anyway, on that note, we're out of time here, and it's been really great. We can't thank Jim Mars enough for being on our show.
Thank you, Jim Mars.
And we want to thank everybody for listening. Until next time, peace, truth, and love, y'all.
Peace, truth, and love, guys. Bye.